Hello, good and faithful people of the Church of the Mediator. It's Father Dale. I hope you're well whenever and wherever it is you hear this message on this very warm Thursday, my friends. I hope you're keeping cool and comfortable. My question of the day is, when did the push come for the Episcopal Church to officially desegregate, to take a stance on not being a segregated space, including at General Convention? When did that happen? Before I go there, of course, the reason I'm asking that question is because today is June 19th, also known as Juneteenth, a celebration of the arrival of emancipation and the proclamation of emancipation and the enforcement of emancipation in 1865, a little bit more than 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation actually was made in 1863. Of course, that was an embattled time in these United States. Sometimes we get ourselves into quite a tizzy as Americans. Beyond being June 19th and Juneteenth, it is also the feast of the body and blood of our Lord Jesus Christ, Corpus Christi. Tonight we'll be celebrating the Eucharist at 7:30 in Spanish for our 1 p.m. community. This weekend is a busy weekend. Tomorrow, which is Friday, June 20th, from 4 to 7 p.m. is World Refugee Day. As I mentioned before, I hope that you'll plan to come out and participate here at the church on the lawn. There will be a concert in the nave. It's a great celebration of our refugees and our asylees and our commitment to community building in the neighborhood for those who come here as refugees and asylees. Sunday, we have the West Park House Tour from 11 until 4, in between our services at 9 in English and 1 in Spanish as usual. Don't also forget that Bill Corp's retirement party will be the following Saturday, June 28th, 6 p.m. in the Commons Room. You do need to RSVP before the 21st so that we can get a good count for the catering that's happening. And I did fail to give the detail that if you're planning on contributing to Bill's purse, his gift, in your check, make the check to the Church of the Mediator, not to Bill Corp directly, and put in the memo line Bill Corp. That way we can put all of those funds together and then give him a check from the church. That will also make your contribution tax deductible, which is always helpful, my friends. So that was a detail that I forgot to put in my letter as it went out. I hope that that has not caught you up, so to speak. So returning to the question of desegregation in the Episcopal Church, I had to pull out my A History of the Episcopal Church by Robert Pritchard, which is the kind of standard, the go-to textbook on all things Episcopal Church history, just to refresh my brain of the dates of this. So there was a multi-pronged thing that happened, which was that dioceses started to allow the seating of deputies of color at their conventions through the 1940s. Of course, you remember after the Second World War, a lot of the question of racial justice and civil rights became much more important in our common life because people had served the country and came back home having served, and some of them given their lives for the cause of freedom and liberty and justice, both here and abroad. And they come back home and they are forced back into segregated spaces and treated like less than human. And so suddenly there becomes a real push, right, that leads through the 1960s to desegregate and to continue the work of racial justice making and creating a more perfect union for all of us. So the Episcopal Church, of course, as you know, has had a modeled history with racial justice. We were the church in most cases of the planter class in the South, and therefore those who were slave holders. And even in the North, we were oftentimes the church of those who were the big bosses and who also had enslaved persons in their households. Of course, it was not just a Southern issue, the issue of chattel slavery. But through the 1940s, dioceses begin to desegregate their diocesan conventions. The last one to do that was South Carolina, which finally granted full representation to African Americans in 1954. Of course, living memory for some of you who will be hearing this message this week. There was a big to-do in the early 1950s. In 1951, the first African-American student entered Virginia Theological Seminary. Same for the Seminary of the Southwest. But it would be in 1953 that there was a huge fight at the University of the South, at my alma mater at Sewanee, when 6 full-time professors and 35 of 56 returning students went on strike and left their positions because of the segregating policies of the racist policies of the University of the South. It wouldn't be until 1953, later that year, that the first Black student entered the School of Theology at Sewanee. Then there was a really big hoorah, and that was, as these things do, they build, right? The pressure builds, the pressure builds, the pressure builds, and then suddenly something has to be done. We have to face, because the way systemic racism works is it lulls us all, and particularly those of us who are privileged to be in white skin and of European descent, it lulls us all asleep thinking that everything's okay, and that's because we're privileged by it. And so what happens then is it has to get to a breaking point oftentimes before we actually are forced to do anything and face it off and actually make some change, which is usually very incremental. We change one thing and then we kind of lull back to sleep, and then we are forced to change another thing, and then we lull back to sleep, and then we're, this has been the story for a lot of years for various different questions of liberty and justice for all. Nevertheless, it would be in preparation for the General Convention in 1955, which was slated to be held in Houston, Texas, that the church came to the realization that the facilities that they were planning to use in Houston in 1955 were segregated and would remain segregated, and there was no way to get around that for General Convention. And so a group of people put pressure on the presiding bishop to make a change, and he did. This was presiding Bishop Sherrill, if you remember him, and he took it upon himself to basically make the choice to go to an alternate site, and that would end up being Honolulu, Hawaii, so that the General Convention of 1955 would be integrated. Finally, my friends, and those were two big kind of flashpoints at Sewanee in 1953, the General Convention of 1955, but then it would be later in the early 60s, in 61, 63, right? This is getting even more recent, that finally Episcopal schools and camps and conference centers would begin to do the work of actually desegregating and integrating. And that was a painful process as well. It wouldn't be until 1963, for example, that an African American would be allowed to attend the Camp and Conference Center in the Diocese of Alabama. Now imagine this, it would be in 1962 that the Diocese of Massachusetts elected the first African American to become a bishop over a diocese that was majority people of pan-European descent, white folks. That was John M. Burgess, who was elected in 1962 as suffragan, because of course they wouldn't make him bishop diocesan at that point in time over a white diocese. He had to be suffragan bishop, but then he finally would get elected as diocesan a little bit later. So it was a lengthy process for our beloved Episcopal Church. It is work that we continue to need to do and to face off and to recognize in our history as well as in ourselves. Of course, as we commit ourselves to recognizing that God has created us all in God's own image and likeness, no matter what color skin we have, no matter what gender we are, no matter what sexuality, no matter any of those things, we are beloved children of God, and that we need to treat each other with respect and dignity and work for dignity for those who struggle to have it in this time and place. So it is, my friends. You will see in happenings a little bit below this video that Mariah, our beloved Mariah, is offering Sacred Ground, which is a great way to engage the question of the history of race and racism and dismantling racism in the context of the Episcopal Church. Please take a look at that. That will be in the fall if you're interested in that work. It's a lengthy course, but it's worth your while. And so the information is there. I hope a few of us might take that on. Until Sunday, I'm sure before that I will see you, World Refugee Day, and the house tour. Blessings.